Hey, good Friday morning, everybody. BAM Weather Meteorologist Bret here, giving you a long-range forecast update, guys. I hope you all are having a great Friday morning. We have an important update today. Critical update as we go throughout the rest of July, and then new August and September outlooks. And we'll take a pretty decent swing at the forecast here, a pretty decent change to especially the September outlook based off of some of the key pattern drivers that have been driving the setup throughout the summer. Obviously, you go back to several months ago when we put out our very first summer outlook. The idea was that it would be drier and that it would be more widespread with some of the heat. And obviously, that's not panned out. And again, as we talked about on Wednesday, we're happy to admit when we're wrong and discuss why. And so obviously, we've made some adjustments since then. I want to continue with that theme with this new and this big pattern driver that we've been keeping an eye on and what it will mean for August and into September. That will be towards the end of the video, so be sure to stay tuned for that as we work late in this video update. I wanted to start off with the short term and what's been happening across some key regions over the last 24 hours. You can see some rain on the radar right now across parts of Iowa. It was raining this morning in Illinois, some storms in northern Indiana. What I want to highlight here, last 24 hours, some very critical rains for parts of eastern Iowa and northern Illinois specifically. In fact, if you click around here, many areas picking up over an inch of rain, some spots picking up 2, 3, 4 inches plus of rain over the past 24 hours. Why is that so important? If we take a look at our soil moisture percentile, we're slowly beginning to cut away at some of the increasingly dry soils in parts of eastern Iowa and northern Illinois. We still have a ways to go. Central Illinois needs some rain, northern Indiana needs some rain, and into southwestern and western parts of Michigan. There should be some opportunities coming up. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But if we take a wider zoom here, you can see in terms of the more notable, increasingly dry column of soil moisture, in some of the key areas like northern and central Iowa, southern Minnesota, even parts of eastern Nebraska, we've seen improvement. And all things considered, many continue to get timely rains. If we take a look at the last 7 days of observed rainfall, you can certainly see heavy rains across eastern Nebraska, much of Iowa now, southern Minnesota, southeast South Dakota, a lot of corn in these areas, and now with the rain added on into northern Illinois, really some important rains that have happened. Now, the further south and east that you go, especially into parts of Ohio, Indiana, northern Kentucky, even pockets in central Illinois and Missouri and eastern Kansas, it's gotten a little bit drier. It's been hotter than normal for the most part, and so certainly some spots needing the rain. And again, I do think that there will be opportunities ahead, but if you take a look at the next 7 days, red circled area here, and even central parts of Illinois, northern Indiana, still a little concerned that there can be spots that verify a bit more sporadic, but I do think many are able to cash in on rain, with additional rains for much of Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, Missouri. Where it'll be a little bit drier, Canadian prairies, that's an area that's gotten drier, North Dakota, and maybe far western parts of the plains. Now, those areas will be cooler than normal, though. Cooler than normal across much of the plains, Canadian prairies, hotter than normal, continuing that theme that we've been talking about in the eastern ag belt and up into the northeast part of the country. Now, as we talked about the other day, cold front coming in as we work into next week will cool things down for much of the ag belt. We did see some warmer trends last night in the Ohio Valley. We still need to keep an eye on this area. This has just been the tendency all summer long for this area to stay a little bit warmer. Still think that there's a 4 or 5 day period in here where we can get more seasonable to cooler, but may still be dealing with above normal temperatures by the end of the week 2 period. Areas further to the east. And let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at some of the ups and downs to expect. Here's a cold front this weekend in the central U.S. We warm back up as we get into early to mid next week. Some much above normal temperatures possible in the Ohio Valley and into the northeast part of the country. But then look at the strong blast of colder air that comes in. And you can see well below normal temperatures for much of the ag belt here as we get into late next week. And then by next weekend, pretty much the entirety of the ag belt, the primary growing regions, will be cooler than normal. So several days of cooler than normal temperatures on the table here, guys. But this is what I was talking about in the Ohio Valley, trying to warm things back up a little bit by the time we work late into the week 2 time period. with more seasonable to cooler conditions persisting for the northern plains. In general, that again has been a tendency, especially in the east all summer long. I definitely think it's something we need to keep an eye on rolling into August. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. In terms of August, and in terms of our weeks 3 and 4 forecast, which is the last week of July, first week of August, I want to make this note. This was, before we get into the new forecast, this was the EPS forecast on the top in the weeks 3 and 4 time frame for what is now the next 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, this was the EPS forecast versus what that forecast looks like now for the next 2 weeks. This model completely missed the forecast. And I show this because I want to highlight that especially the EPS and the GEFS in the extended range have been virtually useless. The CFS has actually been a little bit better, but the EPS and the GEFS, and especially the EPS, has been very, very bad with its sub-seasonal forecasts 3 weeks out and beyond. And so I'm not even going to factor this into the outlook today. It's just not worth it. It's been bad. It's had a terrible bias to be too hot in the plains and too dry in the plains. We're going to completely scratch it. I wouldn't consider it. If you're somebody that looks at some of the weekly data, I would just ignore it right now. It's been horrible. It's not worth looking at. What is worth looking at is what's going on in the Atlantic. And we've talked about this at times throughout the summer. I want to loop back around to it because I think it continues to be a major factor in not only what is happening in our pattern across the country, but what will happen with hurricane season down the road. Very warm temperatures compared to normal here across the western portions of the Atlantic off the east coast of the United States. Why is this important? Well, it's reinforcing what we call the Bermuda High. This area of high pressure, this ridge of high pressure, expanding more than what models can see in the extended range. Why is that important? Well, 2 reasons. Number one, it allows for warmth to persist in the eastern third of the country. It also funnels moisture from the Gulf up towards the central and the eastern part of the country. It's keeping us active. It's keeping us humid. There are no signs that this is going to go away anytime soon. In fact, this is one of the strongest anomalies that I could find going back the last 20, 30 years or so. So I wanted to look at years that did something similar. The only year that is not a great match is last year. I threw it in here because it's a fantastic tropical forcing match. So I did want to at least include a little bit of that flavor in there. But here's a look at what those years looked like in July. Based off of where we've been month to date, plus the next 2 weeks, this is going to probably verify very good. Maybe a little bit cooler in here, not out of the question, but all things considered, I know we're starting out a little bit drier in the Ohio Valley. The rains maybe could be a tick further west, but this is about as good as you get from an analog perspective. This will be very, very close to how July ends up looking. And so I wanted to look to see, okay, well, what do these years do into August? Tends to favor this south and east United States ridge through here, with more seasonable to cooler temperatures across the north central part of the country. What does it mean in terms of precipitation? Well, a continued active pattern in the plains. Through here, probably up the east coast as well, maybe a little bit less active in the Ohio Valley Great Lakes, which we've seen at times over the past several weeks. The question is, do we have any model data support for this? Well, believe it or not, while the EPS ensemble, the blend of all of its different members, is completely out to lunch, the control, its kind of individual member, as we get into weeks 3 and 4, actually highlights this pattern very well. You can see heat in the Pacific Northwest, milder pattern southeast and east coast, a little bit cooler in the middle. Now, the signal would be with time, this Bermuda High, the southeast ridge, can perhaps strengthen, would indicate that after the first week or so of the month of August, we start to warm up in a little bit more of a notable fashion in the eastern half of the U.S. Do we have other support, though? Obviously, that's what the Atlantic Ocean would indicate. Do we have support from other pattern drivers? Here's a look at the North Pacific pattern. This would indicate a cooler risk, generally, towards the end of July and into the start of August, but not notable, not as notable as what we'll see in parts of week 2. I would imagine this warmth it has in the southwest probably needs to come further to the north and to the west. The general idea here is that ag belt, seasonable in general, maybe slightly cooler the further north you go. You get into this August 3rd to 9th time frame, still kind of has that signal up here, but warming things up in the east, which again has been the tendency we've had for a long time. And so I think the idea for August is the start of the month may be a little bit cooler, a little bit more active, but I think that with time, there can be more opportunities for this warmth in the east to expand. I do actually like the CFS forecast. I think that it shows the idea pretty well. Tropical forcing indications would suggest that the last week of July is at the very least seasonable to maybe cooler than normal, with at first some of the heat in the Canadian prairies, Pacific Northwest, maybe far northern plains. With time, this south and east U.S. ridge by the week 4 time frame begins to ramp up, and your seasonable to cooler air will start to shift back a little bit to the north. Want to make it clear here, though, guys, I don't really see notable heat in either of these time frames. Just kind of giving you the breakdown of how things maybe shift. But in terms of like substantial extreme heat, I don't really see that signal through the first week of August. With all that in mind, here's what we did for weeks 3 and 4. Again, the start of the period, it may be warmer across parts of the northern plains, Canadian prairies, and maybe some of this cooler air is a little bit further east, Great Lakes, Northeast U.S. With time, I do think this eastern U.S. warmth will begin to expand a little bit in this time frame. Again, all things considered, not notable heat, but above normal temperatures continuing for parts of the Ohio Valley and into the northeastern United States, seasonable to cooler across the northern Ag Belt regions. In terms of precip, while I do want to emphasize, I continue to think that the pattern is messy, have and have-nots, areas locally higher, locally lower. A lot of green in here because I think that it's still active. With the cold fronts, with the transition of the cooler air and the warmer air, I just think it's active. Analogs are active. And I do think that especially the week 3 period is wetter than normal. Would not be shocked with time, again, maybe to get a little bit drier in this area here. In terms of the rest of August and into September, I want to show this real quick because I do think tropical activity begins to have a bigger influence on things down the road. What you're looking at here is the wind shear forecast. Wind shear is bad for hurricanes. The more wind shear you have, the less chance for tropical activity you're going to have. In the short term, a lot of reds and oranges, which means very difficult to get tropical activity. What we start to see by week 4 and week 5, first week of August, second week of August and beyond, less wind shear. I think that as we get probably the second week of August especially, I would imagine that tropical activity really begins to ramp up. I think that is something we need to watch very, very carefully as we work into the early to mid part of August. The other key thing that I've been noticing, and as we talked about earlier, note the Bermuda high here. Was very weak, was forecasted to be very weak in the extended range. Note how it bubbles up here as the pattern rolls forward. Model data just continuing to underdo this signal. So I think that this continues to be a big driver as we head into August. What I think the takeaway here is, I think that especially as we get tropical activity to ramp up, you typically get hotter patterns to develop in the U.S. My suspicion is that, there can still be some cooler air in early August. I would watch out for maybe the back half of August to get hotter in a more widespread fashion. August into September of these years overall favors a hotter pattern. And in terms of moisture, it tends to favor a drier pattern for the eastern ag belt. If you recall, last year it got hot and dry the back half of the season. I don't necessarily think it's a complete repeat of last year. There are differences. But I think there could be some tendencies that favor late August into September getting hotter and drier as a whole, especially for eastern ag belt regions. And with that in mind, our updated August forecast, it's warmer than normal, especially further to the east. More seasonal in the northern plains. Again, the start of the month, the seasonal to cooler air can maybe start a little bit further to the east. This warmth building from the east coast westward with time. In terms of moisture, while it may be more active to start the month in the Ohio Valley, I think the back half of the month could be drier than normal. And so maybe, again, a hotter and drier end for the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes to end August. And that rolls into September. Based off of latest indications, I think September can be a hot pattern as a whole, especially if tropical activity ramps up as we noted and as we expect it to. What does that mean in terms of precipitation? We trended quite a bit drier, especially for the Ohio Valley, parts of the Central Plains, and into the northeastern part of the country. Moisture along the Gulf Coast. Our top hurricane season analogs tend to favor tracks in the western Gulf and then up the Gulf Coast towards the southeast. Tried to highlight that here with better moisture opportunities perhaps into the northern plains. So again, that's a pretty big shift, especially in September with a hotter trend and a drier trend. Something I definitely think we need to keep in mind, but based off of the biggest pattern driver so far this season, which has been, again, that Atlantic Ocean state, that's what it favors heading into late August and September. And I don't want to be behind the 8 ball on that, so I'm going to go ahead and make that note, and certainly something for you all to keep an eye on as we work over the next month or so. Guys, that's all I have for today. Hope you all have a great rest of your weekend.